What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another Stay or Sell. This time we are going to be focusing in on Newcastle United, who is having a lot worse of a season than many people expected, especially with the money spent. Many people were expecting, especially me, for them to challenge for Champions League, but at minimum finish for the Europa Conference League, definitely top 8. But they're currently sitting in 13th place with close to basically no hope of getting any sort of European football next year. I don't think they'll be able to, in the last 3 games, win all 3 games, and then on top of that, have teams like Brentford, Bournemouth, Chelsea, Brighton, all of them lose every single one of their games that they need to win. So I think this season is chalked up to where they are not going to be able to have European football. So with that in mind, you now have to think about how this affects the squad. You have less money to spend in terms of salary, you have less money coming in, and you have less games to play. So you can focus a little bit less on depth and having all of these extra players that don't overly bring anything other than resting your better players. And you could focus more on having just a very solid 18 players, 15 players, 16 players, and then a little bit of youth sprinkled in. So with that in mind, we're going to be saying who should stay, who should leave. And first is Nick Pope, and I think this is an obvious stay. Really good goalkeeper. He's not on an insane amount of money. He's English, and he's been playing really, really well. Not really, really well, but he's been playing well. Aaron Ramsdale has been fighting with that spot. Nick Pope constantly gets injured, but I don't think Aaron Ramsdale is the solution. I think Nick Pope in between goal is very, very solid, defends lots of shots, doesn't let any bad goals go in, and he really does do a good job in between the sticks. In terms of on the ball with his feet, he's not amazing, but I don't think, especially this season, I don't think Eddie Howe's been overly asking for that. So I think Nick Pope is a safe stay. And then in terms of Aaron Ramsdale, he's just going to be a contract end. He's on loan here. I don't think they're going to want to renew his loan or purchase Aaron Ramsdale. I don't really see why you would want two goalies in terms of Nick Pope and Aaron Ramsdale that are kind of at the same level that both cost a good amount of money. I think you kind of want a definitive number 2. I don't think there's a point of bringing Aaron Ramsdale back. He hasn't overly impressed. He's been bang average. So I think there's no point in keeping him. In terms of Kieran Trippier, who honestly came in and has been really, really good for Newcastle over the last couple of years, but his contract is ending, and I'm pretty sure he's not renewing it. And I think even if his contract wasn't ending, it would have been a sell. Again, there's no European football this year for Newcastle United. They have to shore up the squad. They have to get quality players, quality 16 players minimum. And I don't think players like Kieran Trippier, who are older, who kind of were brought in to just add depth, should be still in the squad. We need to now revamp the squad. In terms of next is Lewis Hall. He's an obvious stay for me, one of the best players in the Newcastle squad. Really good at left back. I think even at times he could play midfield if necessary. That's kind of what he was brought up doing, and it's what he was kind of expected to do at Chelsea before he made this transfer over to Newcastle. But he's solid. He can invert into the midfield, really comfortable on the ball. His defending's been getting better. His service is really, really good. He's really just, at this moment in time, should always consistently be the starting left back. This is a piece that you can build with in your back four. This is almost like a Lewis Skelly type piece where it's somebody that is comfortable on the ball, can defend, can grow with the squad. He's still relatively young, and he's willing to take on defenders. He's very, very comfortable on the ball, and this is just somebody you would love to have in your back four. Moving on next is Botman, and I think he's also a stay. Although he is consistently injured, when he has a season that he gets to play the entire season, he's marvelous. He's one of the best players at the entire club, and really comfortable on the ball, always in the right position. Although he's not overly pacey, he makes up for it with just his positional play. I think if you can get a full 30 games out of him next season, and especially because there is no Europa, there is no Champions League games, you will be able to rest him a bit more. He won't be maybe as susceptible to injury with less games being played. I think Botman will be really, really important. Moving on next is Fabian Schär, and I think for me he should be a contract exit. They can renew him for one more year. I just think it's time to let go. I mean, you have Malik Tiao now, you have Botman. I think it's time to just sign another defender and just let players like Fabian Schär, who have been very, very good servants for the club, but 34 years old, I think he still has a little bit left in him. But if you want to push for Champions League football next season, I think you need to revamp the squad and get rid of some of these older reserve players that are just kind of bringing depth and bring in younger players to bring in depth, like a Mascara for Arsenal. Moving on next is Joelinton, and I think he is a stay. He's kind of what embodies everything about Newcastle. He's works really hard. He really, really does understand the system. Relentless press, scores goals and assists. Really, really an enforcer in that midfield, and is one of the most impressive eights in terms of the Premier League, at least in terms of work rate. And I think he really rounds out that midfield really well. So I think you want to keep someone like Joelinton. And I also just don't know what his market would be. He is 29, going towards 30. I don't know how much somebody other than maybe some clubs in Brazil would really want to spend on him. But I don't think it would be worth the sale because the money would be so minimal to what he brings to the squad. You want someone like Joelinton in your team, and I think he is going to be pivotal. Moving on next to Tonali, one of my favorite players at Newcastle. I think he's going to end up being a sell. I don't think they should sell him, but the reality is there's been a lot of reports on either Bruno Guimarães or Sandro Tonali has to leave. And I think in terms of value of how much you'll get back, Tonali, you'll get the most back for Tonali versus Bruno Guimarães. Tonali's younger. He's a bit better on the ball. He's again just such an engine. Works really hard. Doesn't really get injured. I think you can get more back for Tonali than you can for Bruno Guimarães. And I think Bruno Guimarães kind of just means more to the supporters. I think they want him to stay. He's been there longer, and he really does understand, again, the system well. He really has carved out a really good role for him where he is one of the best midfielders in the Premier League. And I think him staying just makes more sense. So I think Tonali will end up being a sell. Moving on next to Anthony Gordon, I think he is a sell, and I think he's going to be sold regardless. You see a lot of reports right now of Bayern Munich being very, very interested in him. And I think, now is time to cash in. He's really not been performing overly well. He's gotten a lot of goal returns this season, most of them penalty kicks. So it just hasn't been overly impressive. He's kind of lost his left wing role because he just wasn't playing that well there. Started playing as striker, but you spent so much money on Voltemade, you don't want Anthony Gordon playing at striker. And I think now you can cash in and get 60, 70 million euro for him and replace him with somebody a bit younger, or maybe not even younger, but the same age, but somebody that can just bring a little bit more directfulness with their dribbling, someone that's always on the pitch. I think Anthony Gordon's head is just no longer in Newcastle, and I think he should be a sell. Moving on next is Harvey Barnes. I think he's a stay, just a quality player. If you don't see him as the starting left winger, he's definitely someone that can come in and give you a good 30 minutes and always have a sight at goal, always put pressure on net. He's always looking to score. Doesn't get paid too much, so in terms of salary, it's not really going to be a burden, and he still has a couple years left on his contract. I think he's an obvious stay. Moving on next to Osula, obvious stay. These last 5 to 10 games, he's really gotten to get more and more game time, and he's really proven himself. He's on a relatively low salary. He, I think, still has 4 or 5 years left on his contract, so you can have him for minimum at least another 2 years before you want to decide to sell him. And he's just been so direct, really quality dribbles, has been able to score some wonderful goals. He's been really, really important for them, and I think he kind of has the versatility to play as a right winger as well if needed. So if you want to try to accompany him with Voltemade, you can. So I think he's an obvious stay, really, really good performer recently. Moving on next is Livramento. For me, he's a stay, and I've seen a lot of people talk about selling him, and he's been injured, and you have to look at who is trying to purchase your players when you're trying to sell them. And the teams that are in for Livramento are teams like Liverpool. Teams on the top 5 teams in the league are all being linked to Livramento. And when you're seeing that, that means you obviously have a player that is very, very important, and every team can see the potential. He's still relatively young, 23, and when he's not injured, he plays really, really well, defends really, really well, and just works really hard, decent on the ball. I don't see why you would want to sell him, even though I've seen reports of selling him. I think he's an obvious stay. Moving on next to Jacob Murphy. For me, he's just obvious stay. He plays well in the system, still has 2 years left on his contract, works really hard, brings a goal threat. He's basically just one of these depth pieces that you would want to round out your good 16 to 18 man squad. Moving on next to Voltemade. I think he's an obvious stay. I think when he plays, when he plays as a striker, he's been really, really good. And I don't know what got into Eddie Howe to where he doesn't want to play him as striker anymore. And he's playing him as like a number 10. He's playing him in the midfield. He is a striker. And when he plays a striker, he produces. So I think they need to either just revamp the squad where you're comfortable playing Voltemade as a striker, or you have to get rid of Eddie Howe and kind of start to revamp how you're going to want to play. Because if you're consistently not playing Voltemade, who you spent an excessive amount of money on, there's an issue there. Moving on next to Joseph Willock. I think he's a sell. I think he might also be a contract exit. I'm not 100% sure, but for me, he's a sell. He's been at Newcastle for a good couple of years left. I think he has 2 years left on his contract, so I think he's not a contract exit just yet, but I think you need to sell him. We know what we kind of get from Joe Willock. He comes in, there's games where he can really drive with the ball, and he gets shots on target, never really scores them. Occasionally comes up with a goal, but he doesn't really have space in the midfield. There's players that are better than him, and when he does play, he doesn't really warrant himself staying in the starting 11. The versatility is decently nice, where he could play in midfield or he could play as a winger, but I think overall he's just a sell. There's just nothing really there with him. Moving on next to Dan Burn. I think he is a sell as well. I think, again, he has 2 years left on his contract. I think you might want to just cash in now. Again, I think for Newcastle, it's time to slowly move away from these older players that have been in the squad for 3-4 years and have really helped you make that push to be a Champions League team, but now are kind of hindering you because they're kind of staying in the way of letting these younger players play. I don't think Dan Burn should be playing over Lewis Hall. And then as center back, okay, if Botman's hurt and Malik Thiaw is hurt, okay, Dan Burn can slot in. But at this moment in time, he's not even that great at slotting in. And then you would want someone a little bit more youthful, somebody that will stay around for more and more time, like years, to be slotting in if Botman or Malik Thiaw is hurt. So I think Dan Burn, you should just cash in now. He can go to a team kind of in the lower half of the Premier League, someone that's fighting to stay up, and he would be fine there. Moving on next to Bruno Guimaraes. I think he's a stay. He's pivotal to the team. He's their talismanic midfielder. He's the most paid. He's 28. He's still in his prime. I think teams could come in for him, but I don't see why you would sell him if you want to make a push back to Europe. And again, it's going to come down to selling either Guimaraes or Tonali, and I think Tonali's just worth more, and I think it'd be easier for the fans to get rid of Tonali. So I think Bruno Guimaraes is going to stay. Moving on next to Lewis Miley, I think he is a stay, and I think this is somebody that's going to start getting more playing time and needs to start getting more playing time. When he does play, he's really, really impressive. He's slotted in midfield. He's slotted in at right back. He's only 20 years old, I think. There's a lot to come for him, and I think he's going to be really pivotal to this push for Europe next season. Moving on next to Anthony Elanga. He is a stay for me, even though I've really been kind of super unimpressed with the way he's performed this season. But you just purchased him for a lot of money. He is a winger that comes in flows. He needs confidence. He needs goal returns. When he's scoring every other week, he's more direct. He's more of an impressive player for your team. This season, he was never really able to catch that form. So he's kind of just been pretty irrelevant. Very easily droppable. But next season, if he kind of hits the ground running, maybe scores 3 or 4 goals in the first 12 games, you'll see him kind of start really running at defenders like he did at Nottingham Forest. And I think, again, you just spent so much money on him. Selling him would just be really, really a bad move. Moving on next to Wissa, I think he's a stay. This season's just been really difficult, riddled with injuries and the African Cup of Nations Cup. He just really hasn't had a lot of time at Newcastle yet. I think, again, another versatile player who could play in behind Voltamade. He can play as a left wing. He could play as striker. I wouldn't be upset with next season a front three of Wissa at left wing, Alanga at right wing, and Voltamade at striker. That's not bad. So I think Wissa is either a good depth piece where you start him if Voltamade gets hurt, you start him, or you put him at left wing. Someone to really compete, or he's someone that can start. And he played a year ago at Brentford and was their starting striker and had a really good season. So I think he is a stay. Moving on next to Malik Thiaw. I think he's an obvious stay. Really, really good player. Not on a lot of money per week. Really, he's still pretty young. I think he's around 24 years old. Has been a relatively good spark in this Newcastle team this season, even though Newcastle's looked pretty bad. Malik Thiaw has been pretty consistent the entire season, even though he's constantly had different center back partnerships. So I think this is somebody you build off of. Him, Lewis Hall, these are players you build off of. And I think he's going to be pivotal to this next season. Moving on next to Ramsey. I think for me, he's a sell. And, I think you bought him about 2 years ago. He's come in. He hasn't really been overly impressive. I know selling a player a year or two after you purchased him typically isn't the best move. I just don't really, when he's playing, I just don't really see it. He's 25 years old. He doesn't really do much when he's on the pitch. I don't really overly love him. I think for me, he's a sell. You could maybe convince me for a stay for one more year. I'll maybe keep him as stay for one more year, but I think this is a prove-it year where he has to come in and, maybe he can get a spot in the midfield because Sandro Tonali's leaving. Maybe Joelinton gets less minutes. I'll let him stay, but for me right now, I think he really has to prove it this next season. These players down here, relatively irrelevant. Some of them aren't even at Newcastle anymore, like Lascelles. He's at Leicester. This is what I would say for this squad for the upcoming season. Who should stay? Who should go? There isn't really any loans because a lot of Newcastle's younger players, they don't really have many. They don't really have any that break into the first team. And, a lot of, again, why I'm saying to sell these older players is a lot of these players, a lot of the first team is just older players like Dan Burn and Fabian Schär and Kieran Trippier, and you're holding out players like Lewis Miley who should be getting at least some cup games and some first team minutes. So they don't even have any loans because there's no really youthful players to be sent out on loan, and that's something I think they need to improve for this upcoming season. With their transfers, they need to get players that are younger to add depth. And, if everything's going well and there's not a lot of injuries, you can loan them out in January. So this is what I think should happen for Newcastle. This is who I think should stay. This is who I think should go. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thank you.